Unit 9, Lesson 2, we're going to graph the function y equals -2 times the sine of x. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify what is the period length. For both sine and cosine, I'm going to take 2 pi and divide it by the value in front of the x, which is a hidden 1. So this means the length of one cycle is 2 pi. Now that length of a cycle is divided into 4 equal parts. So I'm going to take the period length and divide it by 4. So we're going to take 2 pi divided by 4, and it reduces to 1 pi over 2. Well, that helps me because when I think here, that means each one of these steps, I'm going to go a distance of pi over 2. And in my mind, remember, that's equivalent to 90 degrees. So let me pop this up here so we can see this on the screen. So if I can grab really quickly something to write on my screen with. That means that for this particular function, we're starting here, and pi over 2 is equivalent to 90 plus another 90. So this is what we're going to do. So one cycle, remember sine. A lot of students often forget when they're looking at the ordered pairs, it's cosine before sine. Cosine before sine. CBS, cosine before sine. Now this was the function y equals -2 sine. Y equals -2 sine of theta. So let's identify the sine values. One revolution around the circle is a distance of 2 pi, and then each of the steps is going to be here. So sine is the second number. So I'm going to take this -2 times 0. Well, -2 times 0 is still 0. So let me come back here, and I'm going to go to 0 and make my dot. Now let's go to the next part. Coming up to this position right here, and I'm going to take 1 times -2. Well, 1 times -2 is -2. So let's come back and graph an output of -2. All right, now our next step gives us an output of 0. 0 times -2 is 0. So let's graph that. Our third step is down here with an output of -1. -1 times -2 is +2. And we can end one cycle here by going to where 2 pi is, and 0 times -2 is 0. All right, so we can see this is the basic shape I have. This is a length of 2 pi, and each one of these steps is a distance along the horizontal axis of pi over 2. I'm just going to continue this pattern. So if this is 2 pi and this is 2 pi, it's a total of 4 pi to the right, and I'm just going to continue the pattern going in the opposite direction. And it's one cycle backwards, which is a distance of -2 pi. Let's look now at number 2. I'm going to rewrite number 2 before I get started. So I'm going to rewrite this as y equals 3 times the sine of 1/2 x. I think that will help me when I'm identifying what the period length is. So just like I did for number 1 of the try these, I'm going to take 2 pi and I'm going to divide it by the value in front of the x, just 1/2. So divided by 1/2, I get 2 pi times 2 over 1, which equals 4 pi. So the length of one cycle is a distance of 4 pi. And then I'm going to take 4 pi and I'm going to divide it by 4. So 4 pi divided by 4, because I know that there's 4 steps to your sine and your cosine functions, it still gives me an answer of pi. All right. Let me pull up this again and I'll clear off. Okay, so let's graph number 2. Well, let's start here. We know that we are going to think of this here as one cycle around. So when I start at the very first one, I have 0. Now 0 times 3 is still 0. So I can come back here and graph that. Here I have an output of 1. 1 times this 3, 1 times this value of 3 is 3. So it's being stretched by a factor of 3. It's positive, so I'm going up. And I have 0 here, and 0 times 3 is still 0. And down below, we have an output of -1. Negative 1 times the 3 out front gives me a value of negative 3. And finally, we finish up going once around the circle here. We have an output, again, of 0. And 0 times 3 is going to be 0. So let's take a look at this. Whoops, sorry. We understand this. Let me clean this up. I'll be right back. Ooh, excuse me. This is the distance of 4 pi. Excuse me. And the distance on the horizontal axis of each one of these steps is a distance of pi. I'm going to continue this. Three up, and should be 3 down, not 2 down. Oh, I'm making mistakes. And then I'm going to go the opposite way as well. Okay, so there's one cycle, 4 pi. Another cycle would be 8 pi to the right and negative 4 pi to the left. Let's look at number 3. Let's start by first identifying what is going to be the period length. So I'm going to take 2 pi. We always start with 2 pi for sine and cosine and the reciprocals, and we do pi for tangent and reciprocal. So 2 pi divided by whatever is in front of whatever's in front of the x, which is 2 pi again. Well, 2 pi divided by 2 pi is going to reduce down just to a value of 1. And then I take the period length, always divided it by 4 for sine and cosine, to get a scale factor of 1/4. Okay, so what we're going to notice here is we're going to have the same basic shape. It's going to go up and then it's going to go down, right? But the distance from every step along the horizontal axis will be 1/4. So right here, I'm going to go up. Now, I know that 5 divided by 2, you can do it on a calculator, is equivalent to 1.5 or 2.5. So instead of just going up 1, we're going to go 1 times 2.5. So up 2.5 and down 2.5. This is going to be one cycle. And I'll complete that to the right. So to the right, I have a distance of 1, and 1 would be 2 to the right. And to the left is just one cycle, so negative 1 to the right. Let's look now at number 4. At number 4, let's start by identifying the period length. So I'm going to do it down below. I'm going to take 2 pi, and I'm going to divide it by whatever value is in front of the x, which is a 3. So I have a period length of 2 pi over 3. And now to figure out the length of each step along the horizontal axis, I'm going to take this value and I'm going to divide it by 4. Now when you divide by 4, we're really going to turn division into multiplying and multiply by its reciprocal, which is 1/4. So I get 2 pi over 12. Well, 2 pi over 12 reduces to 1 pi over 6. So the length on the horizontal axis will be a length of 1 pi over 6. All right, now let's figure out where are these main points as we go around the circle. So I've taken care of adjusting the period length and the scale factor. What does this 2 do? So it's going to amplify it or stretch it by a factor of 2. Let's start, how do we graph this? So notice we're working with cosine now. So in cosine, this particular equation was y equals 2 cosine of 3x. All right, so let's look at the cosines. I've circled them in red. Remember, it's always cosine before sine. So I'm going to take 2 times 1 to get 2. So I'm going to start off with 2. And then my next step, my next step is going to be 0 times 2. 0 times 2 is 0, and then negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. So I'm going to do those next 2 steps. We're going to go 0, then down to negative 2. All right. Then down here, I'm going to take 0 times 2, which would be a 0, and then 1 times 2, which would be 2. So outputs of 0 and then 2. So this is one cycle. It's a distance of 2 pi over 3, and each step is a length on the horizontal axis of 1 pi over 6. Let's continue that cycle. All right, now let's identify. We have 2 cycles to the right, so I want to take 2 groups of 2 pi over 3 plus 2 pi over 3, which would be 4 pi over 3. So 4 pi over 3 to the right There's only one cycle to the left, negative 2 pi over 3 to the left. Let's look at that. All right, so I have y equals negative 1/2 cosine of 1/3 x. I'm just going to rewrite this in equivalent form. I'm going to start by identifying what is the period length. So I'm going to take 2 pi and I'm going to divide it by 1/3, which is the same as multiplying by its reciprocal. So I end up with 6 pi over 1, which is the same as 6 pi. Now when I take 6 pi and I divide it by 4, 6 pi divided by 4 is going to reduce into 3 pi over 2. This basic shape, like we saw in number 4, it's going to be the same basic shape. So normally it's going to be hill, valley, hill, but when we have a negative, it changes it up. So it's going to be valley, hill, valley, because we're taking this negative 1/2 and we're going to multiply it here by each one of these values. So negative 1/2 times 1 times 0 times negative 1 times 0 and so on. All right. So I'm going to start at negative 1/2 here. So it's going to look, okay, negative 1/2, and then it's going to be 0, positive 1/2, 0, and negative 1/2. This is one cycle, and I'm going to repeat that. 2 cycles. Well, each cycle is 6 pi, so 6 pi and 6 pi is 12 pi. Now the opposite way. And 6 pi the opposite way. Let's look at number 6. Almost. Okay, number 6. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this as y equals negative 3 times the cosine of pi over 2x. To identify the period length, I'm going to take 2 pi and I'm going to divide it by pi over 2. When you divide with a fraction, you're going to multiply by the reciprocal. So in doing so, I end up with 2 pi times 2 over pi. Well, the pi's, you may want to say cancel, but really they're reduced down to 1, and we get 2 times 2 is 4. So a period length is 4, and we divide 4 by 4, we get an x scale of 1. All right. Now, out front is a negative 3. So just like number 5, instead of going hill, valley, hill, and making this basic shape like it normally makes, instead of doing that, we're going to reverse it. And we're going to stretch it by a factor of 3. So I'm starting down 3. 1, 2, 3. Coming up, and then back down again. So this is one cycle, and that's a length of 4. That's one cycle, and it's a length of 4. I'm going to continue that again. So 4 and 4 is 8 to the right, and then back up here. And negative 3 to the left.